the Etruscans, and the birth of Rome. Beneath the sunlit skies of the Italian peninsula, long before Rome rose to power, the land was a patchwork of cultures, languages, and traditions. Mountains carved boundaries, rivers nourished fields, and the sea connected communities to distant worlds. Here, in this fertile and diverse landscape, the story of Italy began. It is a story not of one people alone, but of many tribes whose lives intertwined, eventually giving rise to one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known, the Italian peninsula before Rome. In the first millennium BCE, the Italian peninsula was home to numerous groups. In the north, the mysterious Etruscans thrived. In the central regions, Latin tribes built villages. And in the south, Greek settlers founded colonies along the coast, known as Magna Graecia. Each group brought unique customs, religions, and innovations, shaping the cultural mosaic that would become Italy. The land itself encouraged diversity. The Apennine Mountains ran like a spine down the peninsula, dividing communities, yet also offering protection. Rivers such as the Tiber and the Po provided fertile valleys for farming and routes for trade. The surrounding seas connected Italy to Greece, North Africa, and beyond, making it a crossroads of Mediterranean life. The Etruscans, a mysterious people, the Etruscans remain one of the most fascinating and enigmatic cultures of early Italy. Their origins are still debated. Some scholars believe they came from Asia Minor, while others argue they were native to Italy. What is clear is that, by the 8th century BCE, the Etruscans had established powerful city-states in central Italy, in regions that today include Tuscany, Lazio, and Umbria. Etruscan society was highly organized. They built cities with advanced urban planning, constructed elaborate tombs decorated with frescoes, and developed a writing system derived from the Greek alphabet. Their religion was deeply spiritual, guided by rituals, omens, and the interpretation of signs from the gods. The Etruscans were skilled artisans and engineers. They crafted exquisite jewelry, bronze statues, and painted pottery. They also excelled at building. Their knowledge of the arch, drainage systems, and city fortifications would later influence Roman engineering. Trade connected the Etruscans with the wider Mediterranean world. They exchanged goods with the Greeks, Phoenicians, and Carthaginians, importing luxury items while exporting metals, wine, and agricultural products. Through these interactions, they absorbed cultural influences while shaping their own distinctive identity. Greek colonies in southern Italy, while the Etruscans thrived in the north, Greek settlers expanded across southern Italy and Sicily. These colonies, part of Magna Graecia, brought Greek language, art, and philosophy to the peninsula. Cities such as Naples, Neapolis, Syracuse, and Tarentum became centers of learning and culture. Greek influence was immense. Temples, theaters, and markets reflected Greek design, and local populations adopted aspects of Greek religion and governance. Philosophy mathematics, and science entered Italy through these colonies, providing a foundation that would later enrich Roman culture. Thus, long before Rome rose to power, Italy was already a meeting ground of civilizations Etruscan, Greek, Latin, and others. The founding of Rome, legend and reality. Among the Latin tribes living along the Tiber River, one settlement would one day become Rome. Its origins are shrouded in both myth and history, blending legend with archaeological evidence. According to Roman tradition, the city was founded in 753 BCE by Romulus, after a dramatic tale of survival. The twin brothers Romulus and Remus, descendants of the Trojan hero Aeneas, were abandoned as infants, but saved and nurtured by a she-wolf. Grown into strong leaders, they sought to build a new city. Conflict arose between them, and Romulus, after killing Remus, became the first king of Rome, naming the city after himself. While the legend is rich in symbolism, archaeology supports the existence of early settlements on the Palatine Hill around this time. Small villages of huts gradually merged, united by trade, defense, and shared rituals. The city's strategic position on the Tiber provided access to the sea while protecting it from direct coastal attacks. The kings of Rome. Before the Republic, Rome was ruled by kings. These monarchs, whether historical or partly mythical, played a vital role in shaping Roman identity. 7 kings are traditionally listed, beginning with Romulus and ending with Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud. Each king contributed to Rome's growth. Romulus established the city's basic institutions. Numa Pompilius emphasized religion and law. Tullus Hostilius expanded Rome through conquest. Ancus Marcius built infrastructure, including bridges and harbors. Later kings, particularly the Etruscans, introduced advanced engineering, urban planning, and religious rituals. Etruscan influence during this period was profound. Rome adopted the arch, the use of stone in building, and elements of religious practice from the Etruscans. The Cloaca Maxima, one of the world's earliest sewage systems, reflected Etruscan engineering skill. The overthrow of the monarchy. The last king, Tarquinius Superbus, ruled with cruelty and arrogance, sparking resentment among the Roman people. His downfall came after a scandal involving his son and the noblewoman Lucretia, whose tragic fate led to an uprising. Around 509 BCE, the monarchy was overthrown, and Rome declared itself a republic. This moment marked a turning point in Roman history. The rejection of monarchy in favor of a republic defined Rome's political culture for centuries, shaping its values of shared power, civic duty, and suspicion of tyranny. The legacy of early Italy. The foundations of Rome were laid by the cultures that preceded and surrounded it. From the Etruscans, Rome inherited engineering, architecture, and aspects of religion. From the Greeks, Rome absorbed art, philosophy, and systems of governance. From its Latin roots, Rome preserved language, tradition, and a sense of community. This blending of influences gave Rome its strength. Positioned at the crossroads of the Mediterranean, the city grew not by isolation, but by openness to ideas, trade, and innovation. The early struggles and successes of the Italians, Etruscan, Greek, and Latin alike, prepared the way for Rome's rise as a world power. Reflection: imagine standing on the Palatine Hill, looking over the Tiber River as it winds through the landscape. Small villages dot the hillsides, smoke rising from hearths, children playing in narrow lanes. Farmers till the soil, traders carry goods along dusty roads, and priests watch the skies for signs from the gods. Here, among modest huts and sacred groves, the future is quietly being shaped. Rome, still young and uncertain, will one day command empires, legislate laws for nations, and carry forward the spirit of Italy to the farthest corners of the world. But for now, in these early days, its destiny is just beginning, rooted in the strength of its people, the wisdom of its neighbors, and the enduring myths that gave them hope and meaning. When Rome cast aside its kings around 509 BCE, it was not simply the end of monarchy, but the beginning of an entirely new way of life. A system arose that was neither the rule of one man nor the chaos of the crowd, but something carefully balanced in between. Power was shared, responsibilities were divided, and the city entered an age that would shape its destiny for centuries. The age of the Republic. 2 consuls, chosen each year, carried the highest authority, yet neither could act without the other. Behind them stood the Senate, a council of elders guiding decisions with the weight of tradition. Laws and offices were woven together in such a way that no single person could easily seize control. It was not perfect, for Rome was still divided between patricians, the noble families, and plebeians, the common citizens. Yet in time, through patient struggle, the voices of the plebeians grew stronger. The creation of the tribunes, officials who could protect the people from injustice, marked one of the first steps toward balance. The Roman spirit was not sustained by institutions alone. It was carried in the values of its citizens: duty to family and gods, courage in battle, and gravity in conduct. To serve the community was not seen as a burden, but as an honor. Festivals, sacrifices, and rites bound the people together, reminding them that their city stood under the watchful eyes of the divine. Beyond the walls of Rome, the world called. First came the wars of Italy, as Rome subdued neighbors and forged alliances, binding the peninsula under its command. Then came the great struggle with Carthage. Across decades, Roman determination was tested by storms at sea, by the genius of Hannibal crossing the Alps with his elephants, and by the terror of defeats where entire legions fell. Yet Rome endured, patiently, stubbornly. It rose again and again, until Carthage lay in ashes and Rome's banners flew over Sicily, Spain, and beyond. To the east lay the realms once ruled by Alexander the Great. Macedonia, Greece, and the kingdoms of Asia offered both treasures and dangers. One by one, they fell under Roman influence, until the proud cities of Greece bowed before the rising power from the west. And though Rome conquered Greece with its armies, it was Greece that conquered Rome with its culture. Philosophy, art, and literature flowed into Roman life, shaping the very soul of the Republic. But expansion brought shadows. Wealth gathered into the hands of the few, while the many struggled. Estates grew vast, worked by slaves, while small farmers lost their lands. Voices rose demanding justice. The brothers Gracchus, who sought reform, gave their lives in the attempt. Violence entered politics, and once broken, that boundary would not easily be restored. Generals grew powerful, their soldiers more loyal to them than to the state. Armies marched not only against foreign enemies, but against Rome itself. The balance so carefully designed began to falter. Amid this turbulence stood Julius Caesar, a man of ambition and brilliance. His victories in Gaul made him beloved by his troops and feared by his rivals. Ordered to lay down his command, he chose instead to cross the Rubicon, a simple act that changed history. Civil war followed, and when he emerged victorious, Caesar held in his hands a power the Republic had once sworn never to allow. He enacted reforms, sought stability, and envisioned a Rome greater than ever before. Yet to many, he seemed no different from the kings their ancestors had cast out. And so, on the Ides of March, he fell beneath the daggers of men who claimed to be saving liberty. But his death did not restore the Republic. Instead, it opened a door to new conflicts and to a transformation that could not be undone. The Republic had endured for centuries, spreading its laws and values across seas and mountains. It had turned a single city into the master of Italy, and Italy into the heart of an empire. Yet, its very success carried within it the seeds of change. And as the old order faltered, a new chapter in Rome's story quietly began to take shape, one that would see the rise of emperors and the dawning of an age even more vast and powerful than the Republic itself. The rise of the Roman Empire. The death of Julius Caesar did not bring peace to Rome. Instead, it opened the floodgates of chaos. The men who believed they were saving the Republic by striking him down soon found that they had only unleashed more bloodshed. The city trembled with uncertainty, and the people longed for stability. Out of this turmoil, new leaders emerged, and with them came the gradual transformation of Rome from a republic of shared power into an empire ruled by one man. The shift was not immediate, nor was it simple. It unfolded through years of alliances, betrayals, battles, and reforms. What began as a fragile republic, torn by civil war, evolved into a system that would dominate the Mediterranean for centuries. To understand the rise of the Roman Empire is to witness both the brilliance and the fragility of human ambition. The aftermath of Caesar's death, when Caesar fell beneath the knives of his assassins in 44 BCE, the Senate briefly believed it had restored liberty. But the Roman people did not see it that way. To them, Caesar had been a hero, a champion of the poor, and a bringer of victories. His funeral, filled with grief and anger, turned into a riot. Mobs stormed the homes of the conspirators, and many fled for their lives. Among those left in Rome was Marcus Antonius, Mark Antony, Caesar's trusted ally and loyal friend. Clever, ambitious, and charismatic, Antony positioned himself as the rightful heir to Caesar's influence. Yet he was not alone. Caesar had named his young grandnephew, Octavian, as his adopted son and heir. Though barely 19, Octavian showed remarkable determination. He entered Rome quietly, but soon revealed a political instinct that would outmatch even seasoned veterans. The second triumvirate, Antony, Octavian, and another of Caesar's allies, Marcus Lepidus, formed a fragile alliance known as the Second Triumvirate. Unlike the earlier triumvirate of Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, this new arrangement was legalized, granting them extraordinary powers to restore order. Their methods, however, were ruthless. Proscriptions, lists of enemies to be killed, swept through Rome. Wealthy citizens were executed, their property seized to fund armies. Even Cicero, the great orator who had once defended the Republic, was caught in this wave of vengeance, his hands and head displayed in the Forum as a grim warning. The triumvirs then turned their attention to Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Cassius, who had fled east. At the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE, the forces of the triumvirate clashed with the liberators. The result was decisive. Brutus and Cassius fell, and with them died the last hope of restoring the old republic. The struggle between Antony and Octavian. Victory did not mean unity. The triumvirate soon fractured. Lepidus faded into irrelevance, leaving Antony and Octavian as rivals. Antony aligned himself with the East, ruling from Egypt alongside Queen Cleopatra VII, one of the most remarkable figures of the age. Cleopatra, intelligent and charismatic, sought to preserve Egypt's power by binding herself to Rome's leaders. With Antony, she bore children and dreamed of a dynasty that might rival Rome itself. In Rome, Octavian painted Antony as a traitor, bewitched by the foreign queen. Through careful propaganda, he stirred Roman fears that Antony sought to make Egypt the center of power, reducing Rome to a mere province. The Senate, influenced by Octavian's skillful rhetoric, declared war not on Antony, but on Cleopatra. The conflict came to a head at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. Octavian's fleet, commanded by his brilliant Admiral Agrippa, blockaded Antony and Cleopatra. In the heat of the battle, Cleopatra's ships suddenly withdrew, and Antony followed. Their forces collapsed. A year later, in Alexandria, Antony and Cleopatra took their own lives, unwilling to be paraded as trophies in Octavian's triumph. Augustus and the birth of the empire. With Antony gone, Octavian stood unchallenged. In 27 BCE, he carefully crafted a new order. he presented himself not as a king, but as the first citizen of Rome. The Senate bestowed upon him the title Augustus, meaning revered one. In truth, Augustus held supreme authority. He commanded the armies, controlled the provinces, and guided the state. Yet he cloaked his power in the language of tradition, maintaining the forms of the republic even as he reshaped them. It was a masterstroke. Romans, weary of civil war, accepted his rule as the price of peace. This period, known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace would last for over 2 centuries. Augustus reorganized the government, established a professional army, reformed taxation, and initiated vast building projects. "I found Rome a city of brick," he famously said, "and left it a city of marble." The Roman army and expansion. Under Augustus, Rome's legions became the backbone of imperial power. Stationed along frontiers, they defended borders and projected Rome's strength into distant lands. Veterans were settled in colonies, spreading Roman culture and securing loyalty. Rome expanded into Spain, Gaul, the Balkans, and parts of the Middle East. In 9 CE, however, disaster struck in the Teutoburg forest, where 3 legions were ambushed and annihilated by Germanic tribes. Augustus, devastated, is said to have cried, "Quinctilius Verus, give me back my legions." From that point, the Rhine became Rome's natural boundary in the north. Despite setbacks, the empire flourished. Roads, aqueducts, and cities knit the vast territories together. Latin language, Roman law, and Roman customs spread, blending with local traditions. Succession, and the Julio-Claudian emperors. Augustus reigned for decades, but the question of succession haunted him. Eventually, he chose his stepson, Tiberius, as heir. With Augustus' death in 14 CE, the empire passed smoothly into new hands, confirming that Rome had entered an era of emperors. The Julio-Claudian dynasty that followed was a mix of stability and scandal. Tiberius was competent but gloomy, retreating into seclusion. Caligula, his successor, became infamous for erratic behavior, extravagant spending, and cruelty. He was assassinated after only a few years. Claudius, though physically impaired and underestimated, proved to be an able ruler. He expanded the empire into Britain and improved administration. Yet his death, possibly orchestrated by his wife Agrippina, cleared the way for her son Nero. Nero's reign was marked by artistic ambitions, persecution of Christians, and the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE. Accused of neglecting the crisis, Nero faced rebellion and eventually took his own life in 68 CE. His death plunged Rome into another period of civil war known as the Year of the Four Emperors, the Flavian and Antonine dynasties. Out of the chaos rose Vespasian, founder of the Flavian dynasty. Practical and disciplined, he restored order and began construction of the Colosseum, the great amphitheater that would host games for centuries. His sons, Titus and Domitian carried on his legacy, though Domitian's autocratic style made him unpopular. The 2nd century brought the Antonine emperors, remembered as Rome's Golden Age. Under leaders like Trajan, Rome reached its greatest territorial extent, stretching from Britain to Mesopotamia. Hadrian, his successor, consolidated the empire, building fortifications such as Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain. Marcus Aurelius, philosopher-emperor, ruled with wisdom and reflection. His meditations, written during campaigns, remain a timeless guide to duty and virtue. Yet, even in his reign, challenges loomed as Germanic tribes pressed the frontiers and plagues spread through the empire. The seeds of change. Though Rome prospered, the rise of the empire carried within it the seeds of future troubles. The concentration of power in one man meant that much depended on the character of each emperor. A wise ruler could bring peace and progress. A cruel or incompetent one could bring disaster. Moreover, the vastness of the empire strained resources. Defending long borders required immense effort. Inequality persisted, as wealth remained concentrated among elites. And beneath the surface, new religions and cultures began to shape the people's hearts, preparing the way for transformations yet to come. A new era dawns. From the ashes of the Republic had risen an empire unlike any the world had seen. It combined Roman discipline with Greek culture, engineering with law, ambition with resilience. Roads stretched like veins across continents, carrying trade, armies, and ideas. Cities rose in marble and stone, echoing with the voices of poets, philosophers, and merchants. Yet this was only the beginning. The empire would endure for centuries, facing crises and triumphs, glory and decline. The story of Rome was far from finished. With Augustus, the first emperor, a new era had dawned, an era that would shape the world long after the last emperor laid down his crown. The Golden Age of the Roman Empire. The empire born in the ashes of civil war and shaped by the steady hand of Augustus had now become something extraordinary. With the chaos of succession behind it, and with wise leaders at its helm, Rome entered what later generations would call its Golden Age. This era, spanning much of the 2nd century CE, was marked not only by military triumphs and expansion, but also by stability, prosperity, and cultural flowering. For a time, it seemed as though the empire had reached its pinnacle, where peace and power coexisted in remarkable balance. Trajan, the warrior emperor. Among the emperors who defined this age, Trajan stands out as one of the greatest. Born in Spain, he was the first emperor to come from outside Italy, a sign of how far Roman identity had expanded beyond the city of Rome itself. Trajan combined the qualities of a soldier and a statesman, earning the respect of his armies and the admiration of his people. Under his rule, Rome reached its greatest territorial extent. His campaigns against the Dacians, a powerful people in what is now Romania, were long and arduous, but ultimately successful. The spoils of these wars filled Rome's coffers with immense wealth. To commemorate the victory, Trajan built a magnificent forum, crowned by Trajan's Column, a towering monument that spirals upward with carved scenes depicting the battles in intricate detail. Yet Trajan was not only a conqueror. He poured resources into public works, building aqueducts, roads, and bridges that tied the empire together. He founded colonies, supported the poor with grain distributions, and expanded the reach of Roman law. Later generations would look back on his reign as a model of imperial greatness. Even the Senate, often cautious in its praise, hailed new emperors with the wish that they be more fortunate than Augustus and better than Trajan. Hadrian, the builder and the traveler, when Trajan died in 117 CE, power passed to his adopted son Hadrian, a man of different temperament. Where Trajan had been a conqueror, Hadrian was a consolidator. He recognized that Rome's vast size made it vulnerable, and rather than seek further expansion, he sought to secure and strengthen what had already been gained. Hadrian was a traveler, perhaps the most traveled of all Roman emperors. He journeyed across the empire, inspecting provinces, fortifying frontiers, and leaving his mark wherever he went. In Britain, he ordered the construction of Hadrian's Wall, a stone barrier that stretched across the northern frontier, symbolizing the limits of Roman expansion. In the east, he reorganized defenses, ensuring that the empire could withstand pressure from its powerful neighbors. But Hadrian's legacy was not confined to military matters. He was a lover of art and architecture, a patron of culture, and a man of refined taste. In Rome, he rebuilt the Pantheon, crowning it with its great dome, a marvel of engineering that still inspires awe today. At Tivoli, he constructed a vast villa, filled with gardens, sculptures, and libraries, a reflection of his cosmopolitan mind. Hadrian also showed a personal devotion to Greek culture, earning the title Graeculus, or Little Greek. He admired Greek philosophy, poetry, and traditions, weaving them into the fabric of Roman life. Under his reign, the fusion of Roman order and Greek culture deepened, shaping the empire's identity for centuries to come. Antoninus Pius, the age of quiet prosperity. After Hadrian, the throne passed to Antoninus Pius, a man whose reign is often described as one of peace and prosperity. Unlike his predecessors, Antoninus waged no major wars, preferring diplomacy and stability over conquest. His long rule, from 138 to 161 CE, was marked by a calm that allowed the empire to flourish internally. Antoninus earned his title Pius through his respect for tradition and his sense of duty. He maintained the legal reforms of his predecessors, improved provincial administration, and supported charitable foundations. His reign was not one of dramatic events, but of steady governance, where the empire's institutions functioned smoothly and its people enjoyed security. It was during this time that the empire reached a kind of equilibrium. Trade routes stretched across the Mediterranean and beyond, carrying goods, ideas, and cultures. Cities thrived, adorned with temples, theaters, and baths. Roman citizenship expanded, and the sense of belonging to a vast and orderly world deepened. For many, it must have seemed that Rome's greatness was eternal. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, when Antoninus Pius died, he left the empire to Marcus Aurelius, a man destined to become one of history's most admired rulers. Unlike many emperors, Marcus was not only a soldier and statesman, but also a philosopher. Steeped in the teachings of Stoicism, he believed in duty, self-discipline, and the fleeting nature of power. Marcus did not seek the throne, it was thrust upon him. His reign, however, was far from easy. Plagues swept across the empire, killing thousands. The northern frontiers erupted with conflict as Germanic tribes pressed against Rome's borders. For much of his rule, Marcus spent his days in military camps, leading his legions and writing his reflections in what would become the Meditations, a work still read today for its wisdom and humility. In his writings, Marcus revealed the burden of power. He reminded himself daily that he was but a man, that anger and pride must be mastered, and that service to others was the true measure of greatness. Though beset by difficulties, he held firm to these principles, embodying the ideal of a philosopher king. His reign symbolized both the strength and fragility of Rome. Strong, because the empire still commanded vast resources and loyal armies. Fragile, because beneath the surface, pressures were building that no emperor could entirely control. Daily life in the Golden Age, beyond emperors and wars, the Golden Age was felt in the lives of ordinary Romans. In the bustling streets of cities, markets overflowed with goods from across the empire. Grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul, spices from the east. Amphitheaters echoed with cheers as gladiators fought, while theaters staged dramas and comedies. Public baths provided not only cleanliness, but also a place for social life, where citizens could relax, converse, and conduct business. In the countryside, villas and farms stretched across fertile lands, feeding the cities. Roads and aqueducts ensured that even distant provinces were tied to the capital. The empire was a world of contrasts. Senators in marble palaces, soldiers marching on distant frontiers, slaves laboring in fields, philosophers debating in forums. Yet all were bound together by the structure of Rome, a vast and intricate web of power, culture, and tradition. The meaning of the Golden Age. To call this period Rome's Golden Age is not to say it was perfect. Inequality remained, slavery was widespread, and political intrigue never fully vanished. But compared to the turbulence before and the crises that would come after, the second century shone brightly. The empire enjoyed stability, prosperity, and cultural vitality on a scale unmatched before or since. Later historians would look back on the reigns of Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius as a time when Rome's promise seemed fully realized. The empire was vast, its culture flourishing, its administration effective. For many, it must have felt as though Rome had indeed reached the height of its destiny. A subtle shift, yet even in this golden light, shadows lengthened. The strains of maintaining a vast empire never disappeared. Armies were stretched thin, defending long borders against persistent threats. Plagues weakened populations. Wealth flowed unevenly, deepening divides between rich and poor. The death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 CE marked a turning point. His son Commodus inherited the throne, but unlike his father, he lacked discipline and wisdom. With his reign, the Golden Age faded, and Rome entered a new phase, one marked increasingly by instability and decline. But for a brief and shining moment, under emperors of vision and restraint, Rome had known what it was to live at the height of its power and peace. Roads stretched across the known world, cities flourished with life, and the ideals of law, culture, and philosophy intertwined in a harmony that later generations would long remember as the empire's finest hour. The crises and transformations of the Roman Empire, the brilliance of the 2nd century, with its order, prosperity, and strong emperors, gave way in time to a darker and more uncertain era. What had seemed eternal began to show its fragility. Beneath the marble cities and the disciplined legions, cracks formed. The empire, stretched across continents, was vulnerable to pressures from within and without. By the 3rd century CE, these pressures would come together in what historians now call the crisis of the 3rd century, a time of turmoil that nearly brought the Roman Empire to its knees. Shadows after the Golden Age. The death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 CE closed the chapter of the Golden Age. His son, Commodus, ascended the throne, but he lacked his father's discipline and wisdom. Indulgent, erratic, and self-absorbed, Commodus sought to present himself as a gladiator, lowering the dignity of his office in the eyes of many. His assassination in 192 CE unleashed a brief but violent civil war, remembered as the Year of the 5 Emperors. From this chaos, Septimius Severus emerged victorious. A seasoned general from North Africa, Severus brought stability through military strength. He rewarded his soldiers, increased their pay, and expanded their privileges. But in doing so, he shifted the balance of power further toward the army. Rome, once guided by the Senate and civic tradition, became more and more dependent on the loyalty of its legions. The crisis of the 3rd century. After Severus, the empire slid into crisis. From 235 to 284 CE, Rome experienced nearly 50 years of upheaval. Emperors rose and fell with dizzying speed, many reigning for only months before being overthrown or killed by rivals. The empire fractured, sometimes splitting into separate realms, as generals in distant provinces claimed the purple and armies declared their own leaders. At the same time, external pressures mounted. Germanic tribes pressed against the Rhine and Danube. In the east, the Sasanian Empire of Persia proved a formidable rival, defeating Roman armies and even capturing the Emperor Valerian in 260 CE, a humiliation unlike any Rome had endured before. Plagues swept through the population, weakening both armies and civilians. Trade routes became less secure, and inflation eroded the value of money. To maintain their armies, emperors debased the silver coinage, mixing it with cheaper metals, which only worsened economic instability. For many ordinary people, this was an age of fear and hardship. Frontier villages were raided, farms abandoned, and cities fortified. The grandeur of Rome seemed to flicker, as if the flame that had burned for centuries might finally be extinguished. The soldier emperors, during these troubled decades, a succession of soldier emperors attempted to hold the empire together. They came not from Rome's aristocracy, but from the provinces, rising through the ranks of the legions by skill and determination. Their lives were often short, yet they fought with relentless energy to preserve the empire. Among them was Aurelian, reigned 270-275 CE, a man of remarkable ability. He reunited the fractured empire, defeating breakaway states in the east and west, and earned the title Restorer of the world. He also built massive new walls around the city of Rome itself, recognizing that even the capital was no longer immune to danger. But no single man could offer lasting stability. Assassinations and rebellions continued, and by the late 3rd century, it was clear that the old structures of empire were insufficient for the challenges Rome faced. A new order was needed: Diocletian and the Tetrarchy. That new order began with Diocletian, who came to power in 284 CE. From humble origins in the Balkans, he rose through the army to become emperor. Unlike many of his predecessors, he reigned for over 2 decades, introducing reforms that reshaped the empire, recognizing that one man could not effectively govern such a vast realm. Diocletian created the Tetrarchy, the rule of 4. He appointed a co-emperor, Maximian, and 2 junior emperors, known as Caesars, to assist them. Each man governed a portion of the empire, sharing responsibilities and securing the frontiers. This system brought a measure of stability. Frontiers were strengthened, reforms were enacted, and the empire's administration became more efficient. Diocletian also reorganized taxation, creating a more regular and predictable system, though it weighed heavily on peasants and landowners alike. Yet his most controversial policies concerned religion. Seeing the unity of the empire threatened by diverse beliefs, he launched the Great Persecution against Christians, seeking to suppress the growing faith. Churches were destroyed, scriptures burned, and believers punished. Though fierce, the persecution ultimately failed. Instead, it only strengthened the resolve of Christian communities, planting seeds for profound change in the centuries to come. Constantine and the Christian Empire When Diocletian retired in 305 CE, the Tetrarchy unraveled in civil war. Ambitious generals and Caesars clashed for supremacy. Out of this storm emerged Constantine the Great, one of the most transformative figures in Roman history. In 312 CE, before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine is said to have seen a vision, a cross of light in the sky, accompanied by the words, "In this sign you will conquer." Interpreting this as a divine message, he ordered his soldiers to fight under the symbol of the Christian cross. His victory that day marked not only his triumph over rivals, but also the beginning of a new relationship between Rome and Christianity. The next year, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, granting religious tolerance throughout the empire. For the first time, Christians were free to worship openly, and their faith, once persecuted, began to flourish. Constantine himself embraced Christianity, though he retained traditional titles and roles to maintain unity among Rome's diverse peoples. Constantine also transformed the empire politically and geographically. He founded a new capital on the site of Byzantium, naming it Constantinople, the city of Constantine. Strategically located between Europe and Asia, it became a new center of power, adorned with palaces, churches, and forums. Over time, it would eclipse Rome itself, standing as a beacon of imperial strength for 1,000 years after the fall of the Western Empire. The transformation of Rome. By the early 4th century, the empire that had emerged from the crises of the 3rd century was not the same as the empire of Augustus or Trajan. It was more centralized, more bureaucratic, and more reliant on a strong emperor. The Senate's role was largely symbolic, while the emperor and his officials governed directly through an elaborate hierarchy of administrators. Culturally, Rome was changing as well. The spread of Christianity altered values and traditions. Pagan temples stood alongside new churches, and debates over faith filled the air. While the empire still bore the marks of its classical past, a new spirit was rising, one that would shape the medieval world to come. Economically, life remained difficult for many. Heavy taxation supported the army and bureaucracy, and many peasants became tied to their land, bound by obligations that foreshadowed the serfdom of later centuries. The empire endured, but at a cost. Freedom and prosperity narrowed, even as order and survival were preserved. A legacy of survival. The 3rd century had nearly destroyed Rome, yet it did not fall. Through resilience, reform, and adaptation, the empire endured, transformed, but alive. Diocletian's reorganization and Constantine's vision gave new life to an old power. What emerged was no longer the Rome of the Republic or the early empire, but a new Rome, preparing for a different destiny. This was the Rome that would carry the Christian faith across Europe, that would build Constantinople into a jewel of the East, and that would leave a legacy stretching deep into the future. The crises had shown Rome's vulnerability, but also its strength. And though the Western Empire would one day fall, the empire that Constantine reshaped would continue in the East for centuries, a reminder that Rome's story was far from over. The division of the Roman Empire, vast and intricate, had long been a marvel of human organization. From the Atlantic shores to the deserts of Mesopotamia, it stretched across lands and seas, binding diverse peoples with roads, laws, and the power of the emperor. Yet, the very size that had made it great also made it difficult to govern. By the late 4th century CE, it became clear that a single ruler could no longer manage such a vast territory with efficiency and authority. The seeds of division were sown, not in conflict, but in necessity. The challenges of a vast empire. Even after Constantine, the Great had established Constantinople as a new capital. Rome remained central to the West. Administrators struggled with long distances, slow communication, and local unrest. Frontiers in the north were pressured by Germanic tribes, while the eastern provinces faced persistent threats from Persian armies. Economically, maintaining legions and fortifications strained the treasury. And politically, the emperor had to balance the interests of senators, governors, and generals across thousands of miles. The solution, practical and deliberate, was to divide authority. In doing so, the empire would not lose its unity, but would gain flexibility. Power would be shared, with a ruler in the east and a ruler in the west, each managing their domain while acknowledging the overarching authority of the emperor. The rise of the Eastern Empire. The eastern provinces, centered on Constantinople, were rich and strategic. Byzantium, now Constantinople, commanded trade routes between Europe and Asia, and served as a crossroads for cultures, ideas, and wealth. Here, emperors could marshal resources efficiently, maintain strong armies, and defend the empire against Eastern threats. The Eastern Empire was also a center of culture. Greek language, philosophy, and traditions flourished alongside Roman law and administration. The city itself grew into a jewel of architecture, with palaces, forums, and churches reflecting the fusion of Roman order and Hellenistic refinement. For centuries, Constantinople would endure, outlasting the western half and becoming a beacon of civilization long after Rome itself had faded. The Western Empire's struggles. In contrast, the Western Empire faced mounting difficulties. Cities declined, trade diminished, and local economies struggled to sustain the military. Germanic tribes, including the Visigoths, Vandals, and Ostrogoths, pressed steadily against the borders, drawn by the wealth and opportunities within. Political instability plagued the West, with emperors often rising and falling through intrigue, assassination, or military conquest. Yet despite these challenges, the Western Empire retained a semblance of order. Strong leaders like Theodosius attempted to reinforce unity, and fortifications were built to defend critical cities. Still, the pressures were immense. By the late 5th century, the Western Empire had weakened beyond recovery. culminating in the deposition of Romulus Augustulus in 476 CE, a symbolic end to centuries of Roman rule in the West, the transformation of Rome's legacy. Even as the West declined, the East thrived. Constantinople became the new heart of Roman power, preserving Roman law, culture, and military traditions. It absorbed knowledge, art, and architecture from across the empire, ensuring that the spirit of Rome endured even as the Western lands fragmented into kingdoms ruled by Germanic leaders. Religiously, the Christian faith, which Constantine had elevated, continued to shape imperial policy, art, and culture. The fusion of Roman administrative skill with Christian principles created a resilient framework, allowing the Eastern Empire to survive, adapt, and prosper long after the fall of Rome in the West. The enduring influence, the division of the empire, was more than a political or administrative choice. It was a transformation of civilization itself. The Western territories, though no longer united under Rome, carried Roman law, language, and traditions into medieval Europe. The Eastern Empire, later called the Byzantine Empire, preserved the structures, culture, and spirit of Rome, serving as a bridge between the ancient and medieval worlds. Through this division, Rome's influence endured in ways the founders of the Republic could never have imagined. Roads, laws, and cities continued to shape societies. Latin evolved into the Romance languages. Christian institutions spread across Europe. Even as armies dissolved and borders shifted, the imprint of Rome remained deep and lasting. A gentle reflection, the story of Rome's division reminds us that empires, like rivers or seasons, have rhythms and transformations. The empire that once seemed unbreakable adjusted to the realities of geography, population, and the flow of history. In its adaptation, it found new life. Constantinople rose, Western kingdoms evolved, and the legacy of Rome continued, not as a single, unchanging empire, but as a constellation of influence, culture, and law that shaped the course of centuries. The tale of Rome's East and West is not one of simple decline or triumph, but of transformation. It is a story that flows gently from one era to the next, carrying with it lessons of resilience, adaptation, and the enduring power of human endeavor. Towards the early Middle Ages, Europe and Byzantium, with the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE, Europe entered a period of profound transformation. The structures that had held cities, roads, and armies together were no longer centralized. Yet the legacy of Rome endured in language, law, and culture. In the West, new kingdoms emerged from the lands once governed by Rome, while in the East, Byzantium, or Constantinople, became the enduring heart of the Roman tradition. The fragmented West, in Western Europe, the collapse of centralized Roman authority created both challenge and opportunity. Germanic tribes, including the Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Franks, and Lombards, established kingdoms on the ruins of Roman administration. These kingdoms were often small, fluid, and constantly negotiating borders and alliances. Despite the political instability, Roman culture did not vanish. Latin remained the language of administration, law, and the church. Roman roads continued to facilitate trade and travel, and cities, though diminished, remained centers of commerce and faith. In monasteries, scribes preserved ancient texts, copying them by hand to ensure that knowledge survived the centuries. The fusion of Roman heritage with Germanic traditions gave birth to a new society. Laws were adapted, blending Roman codices with tribal customs. Kings ruled with the support of local nobles and warriors, and the church gradually became the moral and spiritual authority across these lands. Even in chaos, the seeds of medieval Europe were being sown. The rise of the Byzantine Empire. While the West struggled with fragmentation, Constantinople flourished. Strategically located on the Bosporus, it commanded trade between Europe and Asia and offered a natural defensive position. The Eastern Roman Empire preserved Roman law, administrative systems, and military organization, ensuring continuity that the West could not maintain. Under emperors such as Zeno, Anastasius, and later Justinian I, Byzantium consolidated its power. Constantinople became a city of marble palaces, grand churches, and bustling markets. The Hagia Sophia, later rebuilt by Justinian, would stand as a symbol of architectural genius and spiritual devotion, reflecting the wealth, skill, and faith of the Byzantine state. Byzantium also expanded its influence through military campaigns, diplomacy, and trade. Its armies defended borders against Persians, Slavs, and later Islamic forces, while its merchants connected the empire to far-reaching markets. The city was not merely a political capital, it was a cultural beacon, preserving classical knowledge while cultivating new ideas in philosophy, theology, and law. Justinian and the codification of law, one of Byzantium's most remarkable rulers, Justinian I sought to restore the glory of Rome. He waged campaigns to reconquer parts of the West, temporarily regaining territories in Italy, North Africa, and Spain. Yet, his lasting legacy was not solely military. Justinian's codification of Roman law, known as the Corpus Juris Civilis, preserved centuries of legal tradition in a systematic and accessible form. This body of law would influence European legal systems for centuries, serving as a bridge between antiquity and the medieval world. Under Justinian, the empire experienced economic growth, urban development, and cultural flourishing. Churches, fortifications, and public works transformed Constantinople into a metropolis unmatched in its sophistication. At the same time, society faced challenges, including outbreaks of plague and internal dissent. Yet the emperor's vision ensured that Byzantium remained a resilient and enduring center of civilization. Life in early medieval Europe. Across the Western kingdoms, daily life adapted to the changing realities. Agriculture became the foundation of sustenance and stability, with peasants working the land for local lords. Villages and towns were smaller than the great Roman cities, but developed networks of trade and craft. The church played a central role in social cohesion. Monasteries preserved knowledge, provided education, and offered relief to the poor. Bishops and abbots became advisors to kings, mediators in disputes, and moral guides for communities. Festivals, holy days, and religious rituals structured time, giving rhythm and meaning to daily life. Despite hardships, people found continuity and hope in these institutions. Roman roads and fortifications, though less maintained, still connected settlements. Rivers served as arteries for commerce. Markets and fairs allowed exchange of goods, ideas, and culture. Slowly, the foundations of a new European order emerged, blending Roman heritage with Germanic innovation and Christian belief. Cultural synthesis and continuity. This period was not merely one of decline, but of synthesis. Roman architecture inspired basilicas, fortresses, and civic structures. Latin remained the language of learning and administration. Christian theology, shaped by Roman intellectual traditions, spread across the continent. In Byzantium, this synthesis was more pronounced. Greek and Roman traditions merged with Christian thought, creating a civilization that revered classical knowledge while embracing new spiritual ideals. Art, mosaics, and literature reflected a continuity with antiquity, even as they adapted to the needs of a changing world. Through trade, diplomacy, and scholarship, ideas flowed between East and West. Monks, merchants, and travelers carried manuscripts, coins, and cultural practices, ensuring that despite political fragmentation, the shared heritage of the Roman world endured. A calm reflection, the transition from the classical world to the early Middle Ages was not sudden. It was a gentle transformation. Rome's political structures in the West gave way to new kingdoms, while Byzantium preserved the essence of imperial administration. The rhythm of life slowed in some regions, accelerated in others, but culture, faith, and human ingenuity persisted. In this era, one can imagine the quiet of a monastery scriptorium, where scribes copied ancient texts by candlelight. In Constantinople, the bustling marketplaces hummed with trade and conversation, while the Hagia Sophia's domes reflected the sun in serene brilliance. Life continued, adapting to new realities, finding peace in routine, faith, and community. The world was changing, yet the legacy of Rome remained, a guiding thread weaving through the tapestry of Europe and the Eastern Empire. It was a period of subtle transformation, of preparation for centuries to come, laying the foundation for medieval civilization, the early Middle Ages, European kingdoms, and Byzantine culture. The fall of the Western Roman Empire set the stage for a new world, one in which kingdoms rose and fell like tides upon a restless sea. The remnants of Roman order mingled with Germanic traditions, creating societies at once ancient and new. In this transformed Europe, rulers sought to stabilize their realms, to defend their people, and to cultivate order in a world that had grown fragmented. Meanwhile, in the East, Byzantium flourished as a beacon of continuity, blending Roman governance with Christian devotion and Greek culture. The early medieval centuries were a period of adaptation, synthesis, and quiet transformation. The rise of the Frankish kingdom. Among the Germanic peoples who reshaped Europe, the Franks were particularly influential. Settling in the regions of modern-day France and Western Germany, the Franks gradually organized themselves under strong leaders known as Merovingian kings. One of the earliest and most notable was Clovis I, who, through both military skill and diplomacy, unified various Frankish tribes. Clovis embraced Christianity, not only as a personal faith, but as a tool for political unity. His conversion, inspired by his wife Clotilda, and reinforced by battlefield victories attributed to divine favor, aligned the Frankish kingdom with the Roman Church. This act set a precedent, intertwining European kingship with Christian authority for centuries to come. The Merovingians established a model of governance that combined Roman administrative practices with Germanic tribal traditions. Towns and cities retained elements of Roman infrastructure, including roads, aqueducts, and legal frameworks. Meanwhile, local nobles and tribal chieftains managed rural areas, ensuring loyalty through alliances, marriage, and the promise of protection. Anglo-Saxon England. Across the Channel, the British Isles were experiencing their own transformations. Following the retreat of Roman legions in the early 5th century, the island became a patchwork of small kingdoms. The Anglo-Saxons, settlers from northern Germany and Denmark, established territories such as Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria. Life in Anglo-Saxon England centered on villages, farms, and fortified settlements known as burhs. Kings and local lords wielded authority, supported by warriors and communal obligations. Trade persisted along rivers and coasts, connecting communities with one another and with the wider world. Monasteries, often located in remote and serene landscapes, became centers of learning, preserving Latin texts and recording histories. Christian missionaries, including figures such as Augustine of Canterbury, played a vital role in integrating Roman and Christian traditions with the Anglo-Saxon way of life. Monastic schools taught reading, writing, and religious principles, ensuring continuity of knowledge in a world otherwise marked by political fragmentation. The Lombards and Italian territories. Meanwhile, in the Italian peninsula, the Lombards moved into former Roman lands, establishing their own kingdom. They preserved many Roman customs while adding Germanic elements, particularly in law and military organization. Cities such as Pavia became centers of administration, while local Roman traditions survived in architecture, language, and trade practices. The Lombard period also brought interaction with the papacy, which was emerging as a significant political and spiritual authority. The alliance between Lombard rulers and the Church shaped the development of medieval Italy, laying foundations for later conflicts and collaborations between secular and religious power, Byzantine continuity, and cultural flourishing. While Western Europe fragmented, Byzantium retained a sense of unity and purpose. Constantinople, as the capital, embodied the fusion of Roman governance, Greek culture, and Christian faith. The emperor remained the central authority, supported by a sophisticated bureaucracy and a disciplined army. Under emperors such as Maurus, Phocas, and later Heraclius, Byzantium faced external threats and internal reforms. Despite periodic crises, the empire cultivated an enduring cultural identity. Churches, monasteries, and public works were built and maintained with meticulous care, reflecting the empire's commitment to both faith and civic life. Art and literature flourished. Mosaics depicted religious and imperial themes in radiant color, while illuminated manuscripts preserved ancient texts and chronicled contemporary events. Philosophers and theologians debated questions of faith, morality, and governance, contributing to a rich intellectual tradition that blended classical knowledge with Christian doctrine, daily life, and social structures. Across both the Western kingdoms and Byzantium, daily life was shaped by stability where it could be found, and by adaptation where it could not. In Western Europe, peasants worked the land, providing sustenance for lords and kings. Craftsmen and merchants traded goods, ensuring the survival of local economies. Festivals, holy days, and seasonal cycles structured time, offering rhythm and meaning to ordinary life. In Byzantium, urban centers teemed with activity. Markets offered goods from distant lands, from spices and silks to precious metals and manuscripts. Public baths and forums provided social spaces for citizens, while the imperial court orchestrated ceremonies that reinforced the emperor's authority and the unity of the state. Education and literacy were concentrated in monasteries and elite circles. Yet the preservation of knowledge ensured that the classical heritage of Rome continued to influence thought, art, and governance. Religion served both as spiritual guide and as social glue, uniting communities across vast distances. The synthesis of cultures, the early medieval period, was marked by a blending of traditions. Roman law informed the governance of new kingdoms, while Germanic customs influenced inheritance, marriage, and local authority. Christianity permeated social, political, and intellectual life, providing a moral framework and shaping daily practice. Byzantium exemplified this synthesis in a concentrated form. Greek and Roman heritage merged with Christian ideals to create a vibrant and resilient culture. Art, architecture, and literature drew upon centuries of experience, reinterpreted for the needs of a changing world. This blending ensured that knowledge, skill, and culture were preserved even in a time of political uncertainty. Trade and connectivity. Trade remained a lifeline connecting Europe and Byzantium. Mediterranean routes, rivers, and overland paths allowed goods, ideas, and people to move. Byzantine merchants exchanged silks, spices, and ceramics with Italian, Balkan, and Middle Eastern partners. Western kingdoms participated in localized trade networks, ensuring the flow of food, textiles, and precious metals. These exchanges were not merely economic, they facilitated cultural diffusion. Art, religious ideas, and technological innovations traveled along the same routes as spices and coins, gradually shaping the emerging medieval world. Challenges and adaptations. Life in this period was not without hardship. In the West, political fragmentation made defense difficult, leaving communities vulnerable to raiders and invaders. In Byzantium, frequent conflicts with Persians and later Arab forces tested the empire's resilience. Disease, famine, and local unrest further challenged rulers and citizens alike. Yet adaptation became the hallmark of this era. Fortifications were strengthened, armies reformed, and governance decentralized when necessary. The church offered moral authority and social organization. Education and literacy, though limited, preserved knowledge for future generations. Through resilience, communities endured and even flourished, finding stability amid uncertainty. A gentle reflection, the early Middle Ages were a period of quiet transformation. In the West, kingdoms emerged from the remnants of Rome, blending Roman, Germanic, and Christian traditions. In Byzantium, imperial authority, culture, and faith preserved the legacy of Rome while innovating to meet contemporary needs. One can imagine the calm rhythm of life. Monks copying texts by candlelight, farmers tending fields under the changing seasons, markets bustling in small towns, and Constantinople shining with mosaics and domes under the Mediterranean sun. Knowledge, faith, and culture persisted, weaving continuity into the fabric of a changing world. This period reminds us that history is rarely linear. Even in times of fragmentation, growth and learning continue. Empires transform, societies adapt, and the spirit of human endeavor endures, carrying the legacy of the past into the future. The developing kingdoms of medieval Europe and Byzantium's resistance. By the 10th century, the landscapes of Europe and the Eastern Empire had transformed considerably. In the West, kingdoms that had emerged from the ruins of Rome were consolidating their territories, codifying laws, and developing dynastic authority. Meanwhile, Byzantium, the enduring heir of Rome, continued to assert itself against external threats and internal divisions, preserving the legacy of the ancient empire in a rapidly changing world. The consolidation of Western kingdoms. The West, once fragmented into small, often unstable realms, saw the rise of powerful dynasties. In France, the Capetian dynasty began to strengthen royal authority, establishing continuity over generations. In England, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were gradually unified under kings such as Alfred the Great, who defended his realm against Viking incursions and promoted learning and administration. These kingdoms relied on a blend of old Roman structures and new Germanic traditions. Towns, though smaller than Roman cities, became centers of commerce and craft. Roads, bridges, and remnants of aqueducts allowed travel and trade, maintaining links between distant regions. Local lords oversaw rural populations, while kings wielded authority through military power, strategic marriages, and alliances with the church. The Viking impact. From the north, Viking raids reshaped parts of Europe. These seafaring warriors from Scandinavia struck coastal towns, riverside settlements, and monasteries with speed and precision. Yet over time, many Vikings settled in conquered territories, assimilating into local societies. In Normandy, they became powerful lords, blending their culture with the Frankish world. The Viking presence, while initially disruptive, stimulated political, military, and economic adaptation. Castles were built, armies restructured, and trade networks expanded. Communities learned to navigate both the threat and the opportunity presented by these northern arrivals. Byzantium's strategic defense. In the east, Byzantium faced continuous pressure from both Persians and emerging Islamic states. The empire's sophisticated bureaucracy, fortified cities, and disciplined army allowed it to survive when many other states faltered. Emperors such as Basil II, later called Bulgar Slayer, strengthened the frontiers and centralized power, ensuring that Constantinople remained secure and culturally vibrant. Byzantium also wielded soft power, using diplomacy, marriage alliances, and tribute arrangements to manage neighboring states. Its economic strength, derived from trade in spices, silk, and precious metals, supported both military campaigns and urban life. Constantinople remained a hub of art, scholarship, and religion, preserving classical learning while cultivating Christian thought. Cultural flourishing in Byzantium, the empire's capital, reflected its unique synthesis of traditions. Palaces gleamed with mosaics, depicting both sacred and imperial themes. Churches served as centers of worship and learning, while scholars preserved classical texts and theological treatises. Artisans produced exquisite manuscripts, religious icons, and textiles that would influence both Eastern and Western traditions. Education and literacy, while concentrated among the elite and clergy, ensured the transmission of knowledge. Philosophers debated questions of morality and governance. Theologians explored the mysteries of faith, and poets and chroniclers captured the events and ethos of their age. Byzantium thus acted as both a guardian of antiquity and a laboratory for innovation in governance, culture, and religion. Daily life in Europe and Byzantium Across Western Europe, life revolved around agrarian cycles. Peasants worked the fields, tending crops and livestock. Villages and small towns were structured around communal obligations and protection from local lords. The church provided spiritual guidance, education, and social cohesion. Monasteries became centers of learning, preserving not only religious texts, but also knowledge of law, medicine, and classical literature. In Byzantium, daily life in cities such as Constantinople combined commerce, worship, and civic ritual. Markets bustled with goods from across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Public ceremonies reinforced imperial authority, while festivals and religious observances provided rhythm and continuity. Education and cultural activity flourished, maintaining a sense of order and purpose amid the wider turbulence of the medieval world. The interaction of East and West, trade and diplomacy connected Byzantium with the Western kingdoms. Goods, ideas, and culture traveled along Mediterranean routes, rivers, and overland paths. Western Europe absorbed Byzantine art, legal concepts, and religious practices, while Byzantium maintained commercial and cultural ties with regions as distant as the Italian peninsula, North Africa, and the Middle East. This exchange of ideas strengthened both civilizations. Knowledge of classical philosophy, engineering, and governance flowed from east to west, while local traditions and innovations enriched the Byzantine world. The two regions, though politically distinct, remained intertwined in culture, trade, and shared history, reflection on stability and change. The early medieval period was one of both resilience and adaptation. Kingdoms emerged, consolidated, and defended themselves against external threats. Byzantium preserved ancient traditions while innovating in governance and culture. Across Europe, communities learned to navigate change, relying on agriculture, craft, religion, and diplomacy. This era, often mistakenly described as dark, was in fact one of subtle growth, cultural synthesis, and enduring legacy. Life continued, adapting to challenges and finding new ways to thrive. Knowledge and faith offered continuity, while kings and emperors shaped political structures that would influence generations to come. A gentle reflection. One can imagine a quiet evening in a European village, the scent of fields after rain, the soft glow of candlelight in a monastery, the rhythmic tolling of church bells. In Constantinople, domes gleam in the afternoon sun, mosaics reflecting centuries of devotion and artistry, and scholars copy ancient manuscripts by lamplight. Across the continent, people live, work, and pray, shaping a world that blends the old and the new. The story of this era is not one of abrupt change or dramatic collapse, but of gradual transformation. Societies adapted, rulers consolidated, and culture flourished. Through both hardship and resilience, the threads of Roman legacy, Germanic traditions, and Christian faith wove together, laying the foundations for the high medieval world, the high Middle Ages, and the final centuries of Byzantium. By the 11th and 12th centuries, Europe had entered a period of growth and consolidation. The kingdoms that had emerged from the chaos of the early Middle Ages matured into more structured polities. Monarchs strengthened their authority, trade networks expanded, cities grew, and intellectual life flourished. Simultaneously, Byzantium faced new challenges, both from the west and the east, yet it continued to serve as a beacon of culture, law, and faith. The rise of strong monarchies in the west. In Western Europe, the development of strong monarchies provided stability. In France, the Capetian kings expanded their influence through strategic marriages, alliances, and careful administration. In England, after the Norman conquest of 1066, William the Conqueror established a centralized system of governance, blending Norman and Anglo-Saxon traditions. These kingdoms relied on a combination of military power, feudal relationships, and the church's moral authority. Castles and fortified towns protected communities, while trade routes allowed commerce to thrive. Markets, fairs, and guilds became central to urban life, creating a network of economic and social activity that connected regions and peoples. The expansion of trade and learning. Trade flourished in this period, both locally and across long distances. Italian city-states such as Venice, Genoa, and Pisa became hubs for commerce between East and West, linking Europe to the Mediterranean and beyond. Goods like spices, silk, and precious metals traveled along these routes, alongside ideas, art, and religious practices. Intellectual life also grew, aided by monastic schools, cathedral schools, and early universities. Scholars preserved ancient texts and explored philosophy, theology, and natural science. The transmission of knowledge from Byzantium, especially classical Greek and Roman works, played a crucial role in shaping Western thought. Byzantium's challenges and adaptations. In the East, Byzantium continued to face both internal and external pressures. The empire's borders were threatened by Normans, Seljuk Turks, and other forces. Yet, despite these challenges, Byzantium maintained its cultural and political influence. Strong emperors, including Alexios I Komnenos and his successors, stabilized the state, reorganized the military, and fostered economic recovery. The empire's cities, especially Constantinople, remained centers of learning, art, and commerce. Scholars and artisans preserved and expanded upon classical knowledge, producing illuminated manuscripts, mosaics, and architectural marvels. The Church continued to play a central role in society, guiding spiritual and civic life. The impact of the Crusades. The Crusades, beginning in the late 11th century, brought profound change to both Europe and Byzantium. Western knights and armies traveled eastward, often clashing with Muslim states, yet also interacting with Byzantine territories. These campaigns facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and culture, though they also introduced conflict and tension between Latin and Greek Christians. For Byzantium, the Crusades were both an opportunity and a challenge. The empire gained temporary military assistance, but also faced political strain as Western powers sometimes sought to assert influence over Byzantine lands. Trade and cultural exchange increased, yet the delicate balance of power remained fragile. Daily life and society in the High Middle Ages. Across Europe, life was structured by feudal obligations, religious observance, and seasonal cycles. Peasants worked the land, artisans produced goods for local markets, and knights fulfilled both military and social roles. The church offered spiritual guidance, education, and relief for the poor, while festivals and communal events created cohesion and rhythm in daily life. In Byzantium, urban centers continued to thrive. Constantinople's markets were filled with merchants from Africa, Asia, and Europe. Public ceremonies celebrated both religious and imperial authority, while monasteries and schools preserved knowledge and fostered intellectual life. Despite external threats, the city retained its elegance, order, and cultural vitality. Cultural and architectural achievements. This period saw remarkable cultural and architectural achievements in both East and West. Gothic cathedrals in France rose toward the sky, reflecting faith, ambition, and communal effort. Byzantine churches displayed mosaics of unparalleled beauty, combining spiritual devotion with artistic mastery. Literature, philosophy, and theological discourse flourished, linking past traditions to contemporary experience. Art and culture were not mere decoration. They reflected identity, values, and the continuity of civilization. In every brushstroke, stone carving, and manuscript, one could trace the threads of Roman, Greek, and Christian heritage woven together over centuries. Reflection on continuity and chain. The High Middle Ages exemplified both stability and transformation. Europe matured politically, economically, and culturally, while Byzantium adapted to the challenges of a changing world. Knowledge, faith, and artistry connected the East and West, creating a shared legacy of human achievement. One can imagine the calm of a medieval evening, monks illuminating manuscripts by candlelight, merchants arranging goods in a bustling marketplace, farmers tending fields beneath a setting sun, and Byzantine citizens walking along the walls of Constantinople as the city glimmered in the late afternoon light. Life, though shaped by challenges, continued in measured rhythm, bridging centuries and civilizations. Byzantium's final centuries. As the centuries progressed, Byzantium faced increasing pressure from rising powers in the East, including the Seljuk and later Ottoman Turks. Yet the empire's culture, administration, and faith remained resilient. Constantinople endured as a center of law, learning, and art, even as the political landscape shifted around it. The story of Byzantium's final centuries is one of adaptation, resilience, and cultural preservation. Though political power waned over time, the empire's intellectual and artistic legacy continued to influence the wider Mediterranean world and beyond. A gentle closing reflection, the High Middle Ages and the final centuries of Byzantium remind us that history is a tapestry of continuity and change. Kingdoms rose, empires adapted, cultures blended, and knowledge was preserved and transmitted. Even amid conflict and uncertainty, life continued with rhythm, faith, and creativity. One can imagine a quiet moment in Constantinople or a French village. The soft glow of lamplight, the gentle murmur of prayers, the distant toll of bells, and the subtle movement of people going about daily life. Across time and space, civilization endured, transformed, and carried the legacy of Rome, Byzantium, and medieval Europe into the future.